The UK just got caught spying on Russia. As well as that, the US is preparing to bomb Iran and a lot more. So here's all the news from the last 24 hours. But first, yeah, the UK's been caught spying on Russia. Specifically, one of the highest level British diplomats in Russia has been kicked out the country for spying for MI6. Specifically, Russia said, quote, "It was stressed that Russia would not tolerate the activities of undeclared British intelligence officers in Russia." As well as that, Russia also got pretty mad at the UK, as you'd expect, and they said, quote, "A warning has been issued that if London escalates the situation, the Russian side will give a decisive response." Now, you need to know that in response to this, Russia summoned the British ambassador to Russia to basically tell him why the hell is the UK doing this. As well as that, Russia also told the British ambassador that this British diplomat who's been caught spying on Russia has just 2 weeks to leave Russia, and if he doesn't, he's going to go to prison. Now, at the moment, we don't know what he was caught spying on or what he was planning to do with this information. We don't know whether Russia is correct and he was working for MI6, or they simply didn't like the guy and they're just making up and he actually wasn't spying on Russia. We don't know. But this certainly is not the first time that the UK has been caught spying on Russia, or vice versa. Ever since the war in Ukraine started a few years ago, both sides have been spying on each other like we've just never seen it before. But the UK does have information on one thing, and that's that the US is going to bomb Iran soon, possibly in a few days. In fact, because of this, the UK has announced they're closing their embassy in the capital of Iran, Tehran. Specifically, the UK said, quote, "We have temporarily closed the British embassy in Tehran, and this will now operate remotely." But the reason this is such a big deal is that the UK very rarely ever closes their embassy in Iran. The only time they do it is when an attack is coming, like what happened back in June when the US bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. And the fact that the UK said it's temporarily closed does suggest that they know something. They know that in the coming days something big might happen, like a US attack on Iran. Now, the official reason the UK gave as to why they've closed this embassy temporarily is in response to the massive riots and protests that are currently taking place all across Iran against the Iranian government. But as well as that, you can't forget that the US is making more threats towards Iran right now than we've ever seen before. And that leads me into the next point, that the US yesterday announced that they're redirecting their best aircraft carrier fleet to Iran, and it seems as soon as they arrive, they're going to bomb Iran. Now, one thing you need to know at the moment, obviously the US can carry out an attack on Iran however they want. They've got aircraft, submarines, it's very easy to bomb Iran. But that's not the important part. The important part is obviously once the US does carry out an attack on Iran, Iran will respond with an attack of their own, likely onto US military bases in the region. Now, at the moment, the US has no way to intercept that Iranian response. They can't shoot down the missiles as they're on the other side of the world. And usually there's American warships off the coast of Iran which are more than capable of intercepting an Iranian response. But at the moment, there's none. But yesterday, the US redirected an American aircraft carrier strike group to the Persian Gulf, and it seems they're going there not to attack Iran, but to stop an Iranian response to an American attack. And so it seems very likely if the US is going to bomb Iran, they're going to bomb Iran as soon as these warships arrive. They're not going to bomb them before they arrive, otherwise the US will be vulnerable to an Iranian attack. Even the US said, quote, "The United States Navy is moving a carrier strike group from the South China Sea to the CENTCOM area of responsibility." But as well as that, it does seem the US is preparing for an Iranian response, not only trying to stop it, but also trying to prevent any damage it could cause if the US bombs Iran and Iran responds. The reason I say that is today the US announced that they're starting to withdraw their troops from some of the military bases in the Middle East. Even Qatar said the US is doing this in response to, quote, "rising tensions in the region." I will say, one anonymous US official did say, quote, "It's a posture change and not an ordered evacuation." But he did also say that we don't know why there's a posture change. Although I will say, if the US does have plans to bomb Iran in the next few days, as soon as these warships arrive in Iran, it's not going to be a really well-known thing throughout the entire US military. It will just be known by top Trump officials. But from what we can see, whether it's US warships being redirected to Iran or US troops being moved out of US military bases to safety, it seems very likely the US is preparing for an Iranian retaliation. And there would only be a retaliation if the US is preparing to bomb Iran again. Obviously, as I've said, for the last few weeks, the US has been threatening Iran like we've never seen before. Trump has been threatening the Iranian government, saying he's going to be overthrowing them. Yesterday, he said, quote, "Help is on the way." Obviously, this is all in response to the massive uprisings against the government throughout Iran. And it seems the US wants to use this as their opportunity to overthrow the government. And to be fair, if the US does bomb Iran, that could happen. But there's a lot more news in the last 24 hours, which is far more important than this. As I cover global news, you need to know that today, Thailand might have been attacked. The reason I say that is that a crane collapsed onto a train yesterday in northern Thailand. And that was terrible in itself. 32 people were killed. But today, a same thing has happened again in southern Thailand. But this seems to be a lot more than just a coincidence. This actually seems like Thailand might have been attacked. Specifically, the building firm which owned the crane yesterday, which collapsed onto that train, killing dozens of people, owned the same crane that collapsed onto a highway today in southern Thailand. And this was not just a small crane. In fact, the pictures of this show the highway literally destroyed. Now, these cranes were not just there randomly. They were actually meant to be there in a construction site, and they were working with a Chinese firm as well, building a joint development of a high-speed railway. The plans and this development have been ongoing for years, so this is nothing new that they're building the railway. What's unusual though is that two cranes have collapsed just a day after each other. Although something unusual, which I will say, is that Thailand actually didn't really say much about this, even though it's such a big deal. Thailand did say there will be a full investigation into what happened and they're going to find out how it happened, etc. But they didn't really comment on the fact that this seems more than just a coincidence. We don't know why anyone would want to be behind cranes collapsing in Thailand, so it's totally possible it could just be a coincidence, but it's certainly quite a big deal. Now, there's one more piece of news which is really important that everyone needs to know about. But first, you need to know about something that's happened to us. If you don't know, because we cover the news that really isn't very advertiser friendly, these videos don't make any money. As well as that, TikTok, Instagram, and all of these platforms just don't pay us, and they cost money to make. This is a full-time job. I deliver the news to you every single day, and I like to think I'm your only source of news that you actually need. Except sadly, I don't think I'm going to be able to continue doing this for too long at the current rate, because these videos are costing money to make, and we just can't afford to keep making them, as they don't make any money. Luckily, there are some people who do help out, and they make it a little bit possible, but for £3 a month, it's less than the price of a coffee every single month. You can pay for these videos to be made. If you want to help out, it would mean the world, and obviously all of the money is reinvested back into you. So if you want to help out for £3 a month, go to the top link in the description or go to alexbarnacote.com. Thank you guys. But the last thing, after the US bombed Nigeria just over 2 weeks ago, back on Christmas Day, today for the first time they've delivered weapons to the Nigerian government, and you need to know why this is important. Obviously, when the US bombed Nigeria a few weeks ago, they bombed ISIS in northeastern Nigeria, specifically Sokoto State. And the US said today that they've, quote, delivered critical military supplies worth up to $750,000. Probably quite a lot of bombs and military equipment. But the reason the US has delivered this military equipment to the Nigerian government is so that the Nigerian government can carry out those attacks themselves on the same groups that the US bombed back on Christmas Day. Something unusual though, since the US bombed Nigeria on Christmas Day, they haven't really said anything. They haven't commented on future attacks on Nigeria or really talking about Nigeria at all. But before the US bombed Nigeria, the US kind of made it obvious they were going to. Trump was talking about, quote, genocide and persecution against Christians in Nigeria, and that does happen. But 3 weeks after talking about it, they bombed Nigeria. They bombed ISIS, the groups carrying out those attacks. Now, the US is probably still working with the Nigerian government to carry out these attacks onto ISIS in Nigeria. They worked with the government when they bombed them back in December, and it's likely they still are now. They've delivered weapons to the government at a minimum, we know that. But we don't know whether the US is going to continue bombing Nigeria as the weeks go on, or whether it was just a one-off strike. Now, pretty much everything I've talked about here is talking about the possibility of wars, rather than an actual war. However, yesterday, and I covered it in the video, Saudi Arabia has actually gone to war with Yemen. For the first time in 3 years, they've bombed Yemen, but they haven't done what you think they might have done. Truthfully, what's happened here could drag Saudi Arabia into a war with the UAE, which would be huge. This is something you need to know about. Obviously, knowing about the possibility of wars like today is important, but it's far more important to know about actual wars. To be fair, you've probably wasted your time watching this if you don't know about that. If you have seen it, great. Come back tomorrow for the next daily news recap where I'm sure something else will happen.